Hi, my name is Brittany Dennis, and today I'm going to be reporting on Brazil. A couple of weeks ago, The Economist did a special report on Brazil, and one of the articles within this special report was over Brazil's agricultural economy, and there were a lot of similarities and parallels between what's going on in Brazil's agricultural economy and things that we learned about and discussed in the Travels of a T-shirt book, so I just thought it was really interesting. And so I'm going to start off by telling a story of this guy named Walter Harita. He's the youngest of three sons of a Japanese immigrant. And in 1984, he left the southern state of Paraná and he headed north to search for land. He eventually settled on western Bahia, which is on the coast of Brazil and in this little region right here. And he bought about 1,200 acres to farm. He paid 4 sacks of soybeans per hectare. They don't use acres, they use hectares. Sorry about that. By 1999, his farm was so successful that his brothers sold up and joined with him. And today, the Harita brothers own 150,000 hectares in western Bahia. They grow mostly soya, cotton, and corn. The story of how Brazil's central and northeastern crop belt, it starts in 1973 when Brazil's military regime, they decided to centralize agronomy research and set up a Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation in Embrapa. It sent 1,200 bright young scientists abroad to study, and when they returned, they were set to work. And they achieved something of a miracle. They made the Cerrado bloom. The Cerrado is this land in this area right here. Whoops. In this area right here, there's a lot of tropical land and pretty much impossible to cultivate on your own. New crops and techniques were adopted by these gaucho farmers, and they were lured to the Cerrado by promise of virgin lands. They began to push northward through Brazil's central states and eventually arriving in the region now nicknamed Maipitoba, which was that whole region I just showed you. It includes cultivatable parts of Maranhão, Piauí, Tocantins, and Bahia, and they built not only just vast farms, but also very prosperous towns began to spring up as well. One thing to note is around 40% of the 6.6 million hectares planted with grains and oilseeds in Maipitoba is in western Bahia. Much of it is producing soya and either cotton or corn planted or harvested in the same year. So they're getting a lot of stuff done within a year. Where rain is too sparse, millet replaces cotton or corn. The transformation of the Cerrado is often dismissed as Brazil's belated discovery of a competitive advantage, but it leaves out a lot, just not Embrapa's role and the courage of the gaucho pioneers. Farming in the tropics is very difficult. Whereas in regions like the United States, there are freezes, hard freezes, where you get rid of pests and you get rid of disease. Well, in these tropical regions, it's a nice, warm, beautiful climate year-round, and it's hard to get rid of pests and diseases because they never go anywhere. They never get frozen out like they do over here. And also, there is intensive soil preparation that has to be done. Farmers have to go over and pass over this land 15 times because they have to do very deep tilling to get to the deep, rich soil, not the acidic stuff on top. They have to root pick. They have to lime the soil. I mean, it's just what they do. It's so extensive and it's so expensive that at the end of it, it costs about as much as the land does just to do all this preparation work. But it has been very successful. AIBA is Bahia's Farmers Association. The average member of this 1,300 member association farms 1,269 hectares each. the average American farm is 170 hectares. So these are huge, huge cotton and soybean and corn groups. There's other obstacles for Brazil's frontier farmers. They include murky land titles, that while Bahia is a little bit more respectful in this, much of Maipitoba is not. And eventually an electronic rural land register will bring a big improvement, but for now every purchase requires extensive due diligence. And also Brazil has a forest code that requires some land to be set aside on every farm nationwide, no matter how far from the rainforest. And getting the Environment Agency to actually agree to let you farm this land, it can take up to years. And there's also, as in most countries, including our own, there's petty bureaucracy that comes into place. And an example they use is that after buying a farm in western Bahia in 2009, Agrifirma built a 23-kilometer power line at the cost of 460,000 reais to connect it to the national grid. And the power line has been finished since March, but the company is still waiting for permission to turn it on. So it can get a little ridiculous there. One reason why you see these huge farms and these huge land masses that are being farmed is survival of the fittest. Basically, Brazil has a cotton plant that is drought resistant, and it's natural selection in a harsh environment. And you see this also with these farmers. Julio Busada, AIBA's president, says that such forces have shaped the region. One of the reasons farms are so big is that only the best made the grade, and the ones that were the losers, they were bought out. And he says, you don't hear those stories so often, but lots of people came and lost everything, and now they're, say, driving a truck. So that's not as well. Some other government issues that have helped improve the cotton farming in Brazil, and not just cotton farming, but agricultural production altogether. Until a couple of decades ago, farmers were being supported by means of minimum prices, government purchase teams, and trade controls in agricultural output. And agricultural output was growing because extra land was being added. And that's the only reason why agricultural output was even growing. But in 1990, Brazil's president, Fernando Collor, he slashed tariffs, he dismantled import and export controls, and since then, the total area under crop cultivation in Brazil has increased by 38%, and production has more than tripled. Total factor productivity has also been growing by 4.6% a year. In these new areas, such as Maipitoba, they rarely even mention the government. There's no culture of subsidies, as it was broken 20 years ago. Brazil has become one of the world's largest agricultural producers. It's among the top three for nearly all 15%. For nearly all of the 15 most widely traded crops, and since it uses less of what it grows than other big producers, it makes the biggest contribution of any country to feeding hungry mouths elsewhere. Even as Brazil's economy was opening up in the 1990s, industrial sectors with powerful lobbies in Brazil managed to hang on to some of their privileges, a legacy of the general's infatuation with government-driven industrialization. And this result is an anomaly. You have a big agricultural producer that protects its farmers less than its manufacturers. And a recent study by the International Chamber of Commerce, a business lobby group, ranked Brazil as the most protectionist of the world's 20 biggest economies. But according to figures from the OECD, a rich country club agriculture is largely left to fend for itself. So, I mean, these farmers, they only get 5.7% of their income is from the government. And in the United States, 12% of income is from the government, and then in the European Union, 29% comes from the government. So you really see that these farmers aren't getting subsidies. They aren't getting any government help whatsoever. The government, it can stimulate innovation, as Embrapa has shown, but Brazil's farmers innovated not only because the government offered help, but because they were threatened with competition. Support for innovation tied to market protection is unlikely to work in the same magic that this has. And also, another interesting thing about Brazilian farmers is, unlike counterparts in the United States and the European Union, farmers, they want free trade and they want open trade. And so you're seeing a lot of big differences between Brazil's agricultural economy and, say, the United States. That's all I have to say. I hope that you found it as interesting as I did, a lot because of what we've learned through Travels of a T-shirt, and I hope you have a good night.